Hi, this is Steve Fryette from Fryette Amplification. I'm the designer of the 2CP module, and I'm going to run you through the basic features and functions of it. It's a 2-channel module with shared tone controls and an assignable EQ that can be set on all the time, off all the time, or only active on the lead channel. And so we're going to start with the clean channel first. So the clean channel, we have volume 1, which sets the amount of gain and volume of the clean channel. And then we have the bright switch for the clean channel, the shift switch for the clean channel, and the shift switch, like the amp that this module is modeled on, bumps up the mid-range quite a bit, and actually in the process reduces some of the effectiveness of the tone controls. Generally on the clean channel you won't be using that so much, but we'll get to that. And then you have the treble, middle, bass, and presence control. Now we'll get to the presence later. The next thing actually in the circuit, even though the EQ is here, the next thing in the circuit are the volume controls. So the master volume for volume 1 is master 1. And then on the high gain channel we have the lead volume, another bright switch named lead bright here, another shift switch named lead shift, and then the lead master. On the original amp, that's the way the controls are configured. A lot of the pots on the original model have pull functions to do various things. The predominant ones are the bright and the shift functions. Those are the ones that are key to the shaping of the tones and sustain and distortion and the amount of crunch and all that on the original model. So that's why we've given them special attention. Things like the pull deep and pull bright for the extra pull bright on the lead function on the original amp are built into the circuit when you switch to those channels, because in a lot of the polling that we did, pretty much everybody said, this is how I set it. And so there's settings that don't require all those pull switches, so we didn't give them specific user accessible toggles to activate them. We just made those either dedicated parts of the lead channel or dedicated parts of the clean channel, right? So now going back to the clean channel, it's important to note that where you set the volume, just like on the real amp, where you set the volume determines how much gain you will get on the lead channel, and we'll come back to that. So starting with the clean, we've got a good amount of gain sweep there, and the bright switch. Now, like the real amp, the bright switch will be more effective as the volume 1 goes down. It'll be less effective as volume 1 goes up. And here's the shift. That traditional cocked wah sound. Right and shift together. I'm using a Hamer Special. It has DiMarzio. I think they're Air Classics. They're kind of like a PAF style pickup, not real hot. So it cleans up pretty well. Of course, single coil pickups will clean up a lot better. that pretty much covers it. One of the things about the tone control, they're pretty typical and they work just like you would expect them to. Mid-range doesn't do a whole lot. And the bass, you normally put the bass about 3/4 of the way up, and same thing here. Now the presence is there to give you a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of warmth on top of the low end. It's useful for single coil pickups to get them to be sparkly without too ice picky. But what it does do is it allows you to balance the upper harmonics with the low end warmth, which is kind of like what one of the pull pots did. But with that pull pot, it was all kind of an all or nothing proposition. And so this is our one concession to the improvement of the design, which is to simplify the operation, only put the toggle switches that are really necessary to get the signature sounds of the original amp, and give you the ability to just sort of balance the upper harmonics and the low end warmth of both channels using the presence knob. Okay, now going to the lead channel, we've got, like I said, we have the lead drive, the lead bright and shift, the tone controls, and the lead master and the EQ, which is after everything. So as I said before, how much overdrive you get out of the lead drive is going to be dependent on where you set lead 1. That's always been that way with that amp, and we left it that way because that will be familiar to people that are used to what it takes to balance those two to get the right kind of clean and the right kind of overdrive. So that same sort of dynamic is here because it's familiar and friendly, and it works just like it. So that means that if your emphasis when using this module is more on the drive channel than on the clean, then go ahead and jack the lead, the volume 1 a little bit more so that you can get more gain. Not only get more gain out of lead volume, but so that you can turn lead volume down and get more expression out of the lead bright. So think of it as a sculpting tool, all right? Now, one of the things about, again, the mid shift is that cock wah sort of quality, which is really useful, and we're not turning the EQ on yet. It's really useful for getting that that classic 70s singing neck pickup sound. I have the treble control turned, the tone control on the guitar turned all the way to 0 for this. This is the tone control up. Down. And bridge pickup. So that's what I mean by the cocked wah effect. So we can add a little sauce to that with the presence control to really add sustain. enough of that. Now the EQ. I'm going to just stay on the drive channel for the EQ. One thing that's really important to know about the EQ is that the volume controls for the clean and the lead channel are before the EQ. So they drive how much signal comes out of the module, and therefore they determine how much level gets to the EQ. So, and it is possible to overload the EQ if you turn these knobs up too high. I generally like to keep them between 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and that's generally where I put them. Past that, you're going to overload it. There's a little overload light here just below the word equalization, and if you're clipping the EQ, that light will come on. Apparently it needs more than I'm giving it. Turn the volume down here a little bit so I can crank it up a little more. There we go. Now, I don't have the EQ turned on yet. When I turn it on, the same thing will happen. This is driving the EQ circuitry. So when even if you have the EQ off, you'll be clipping it, and you may or may not hear that, but it's just letting you know that the settings that you're using, and if you have any boost pedal in front of it or something like that, and that light starts blinking, that just means turn the knob down a little bit, and then you're out of that clipping territory. As soon as you see the light blinking, you don't necessarily hear distortion. It isn't until that light is really hard on that you'll hear a real nasty overdrive. But we're not going there, so you don't need to do that. Just be aware of that when you're doing the demo. Okay, now we're going to turn the EQ on. And of course, on the original amp, and will be the case on this one, everybody's going to do the classic V-scoop on that. I'm at a really low volume here, so it probably isn't going to sound too tight, and you'll be able to dial that in once you start messing around with it, and you'll see how it works. I've found that keeping the presence down a little bit and turning the mid-range up and the treble up gives a pretty tight sound. This is the EQ out. So the whole thing about this, the 2CP functionality, is geared around jacking up the mids on the front and then carving them out at the back with the EQ. I'm using a Fane-loaded 412 cabinet here. This is the Fane F70s, which are a little smoother in the upper mid-range than typical like a Celestion Vintage 30 or something like that. So whatever cabinet you're using, if it has a more present upper mid-range, it'll have more of that bark and bite that you're probably used to. And that will make the EQ sound a little bit more gnarly, which is probably a good thing. Another thing to be aware of on the EQ is each band from 0 has a range of plus and minus 12 dB of cut and boost. That's a lot. So going back to the possibility of overdriving the EQ, if you really just jack all these things up above the center line, it'll overload. And you don't want that. So whatever shape you end up using the EQ for, center that shape around the center line, and that will prevent you from getting into distortion territory. And even between the middle line and 0, that's 12 dB of cut. So that's a nice big slice of frequencies that you can carve out without necessarily going overboard. Now I'm using the sag control for this demonstration. This is off. This is off. This is volume. I'm going to turn that back up. Now I'm turning the sag up to 12 o'clock. If you listen really carefully, you'll hear that the top end smoothed out a little bit and that the bottom got a little bit tighter. The sag adds a little bit of compression, and that'll smooth out some of the gratiness of the overdrive, which is a good thing. And it's a really useful tone sculpting tool. It's not just sag, it does have an impact on the tone, and it's very useful. So experiment with that a little bit when you're getting familiar with it, and you'll find that it's a really useful thing. One other little interesting point that I want to bring up about the original amp that this module is based on is that when you use it with a 412 cab, most of the time the 412 cab is going to be a 16 ohm cab. So if you took that amp and plugged it into a 412 cab and scooped out the EQ, it probably didn't sound as scooped out as it would if there had been an impedance match. Now what I mean by that is the amp only had 4 and 8 ohm outputs. It didn't have a 16 ohm output. So when you plugged it into a 16 ohm 412 cab, you had an impedance mismatch going on there. Now, it isn't enough of a mismatch to do any damage to the amp, but what it does do is it changes the mid-range character. So now I have a power station here that I'm using as the power amp to drive my 412 cab, and the power station has 4, 8, and 16 ohm settings on it, and I've currently got it set to 16 ohms. And so you're hearing a sort of a probably an exaggerated scoop because of that. It's not because the EQ isn't designed properly, it's because I'm using a 16 ohm load on a 16 ohm power output. So to get that classic mid-range, the Series 2 mid-range with the scooped EQ, I could set the power station to 8 ohms, and that modifies the mid-range to make it sound more like this. Now, for reference, here's 16 ohms. Deeper, more metallic, more aggressive on the top. Little bit better palm mute vibe with the 8 ohm setting, smoother on the top, the low mid shifted up a little bit to give you more of a growl. That's a key part of the sound of this thing. So when you're doing a demo, try to use a power amp that has an impedance select switch on it and experiment with using the 8 ohm out and the 16 ohm out into a 16 ohm cab. You'll be amazed. That just about covers everything, I think. As I said, the EQ, when it's switched to the left, is in all the time. So whether I change the channel, it stays on. When I set it in the middle, it's off for both channels. And when it's in auto, it's only on for the lead channel. That about covers it. If you have any questions, contact your Synergy rep, or you can shoot us an email at support@fryette.com, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thanks a lot. Take care.